Hi, welcome to Business 240. In this video, I will be using our STATCRUNCH tool in order to make calculations happen for a problem in your LAB2 that repeats in Quiz 2 and in Exam 1. So this is actually a 3-for-1. The specific lab question, a couple of students asked me in emails, in texts, as well as during the 1 to 4 p.m. meetings. The specific the specifics of the question are happening right now. I'm going to open the homework problem. I hope you can see it. If you cannot see this problem, it is because you could not get it to pop up from the assignment list in your Pearson page. And what that implies is that you need to change your browser settings and allow for the 5 things that we've talked about in other videos. So if you're having trouble opening Windows by clicking on your browser, make sure that your site settings on any of the browsers, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, it doesn't really matter. Make sure that you have enabled cookies, Java, pop-ups, Flash if you have an older browser, and also allow for ads. Basically, open up the system to permit you to click on a page or on a window or on a session, and that click enables the next phase. And the most important things to allow again, cookies and pop-ups, followed by Flash, Java, and add-ins, and specifically ads. So those would be the 6 changes. Allow, allow, allow. Allow the system to be as open as possible. Once you get to a question like this, you'll notice that this problem deals with information about 40 stocks. So if you imagine how the data looks, the data would have 40 rows, and it would have 2 columns. And each of the 2 columns would be a categorical variable. One categorical variable would be recent day. The other one would be what's happening to these 40 stocks 1 year from 1 year apart. A year before, 52-week change refers to a 1-year change in the stock's price, whereas recent day refers to a change in the stock's price from one day to the next. And so what they provide you with here in this problem is with the contingency table, or what I call the summary view of the data. So the first thing I'm going to do is open the summary view of the data, open in StatCrunch. Currently, you cannot see my StatCrunch. It's loading. As soon as my StatCrunch loads the information from this problem, I'll make that visible to you by sharing. So I'm going to share that window right now. And that's what the problem information looks like when you open it in StatCrunch. It looks like a 2-by-2 table of contingency counts. You'll notice that all of these numbers add up to 40 for the 40 stocks. 23 stocks have a positive change in row 1, 17 a negative change by row 1. And these refer to recent changes in the stock price. And so to avoid confusion, the first thing I'll do to this table is change the labels, because having a positive and negative change label for the rows and a positive and negative change labels for the columns is quite confusing. So I'm going to call the first row recent day plus for positive change, and recent day minus for negative change. And I'm going to change this label to just the word recent. Additionally, instead of calling this first column positive change, I'm going to call this 52 week plus and 52 week minus to indicate that these are changes that are happening annually. And so what we would see if we had the subtotals by row and by column, okay, so these are called the row totals, 23 and 17. 23 would tell you that there are 23 of the 40 stocks that had a recent day positive change, and the other 17 would have a negative change. On the other hand, 25 and 15 of the stocks, respectively, would show appreciation over a 52-week period or depreciation over, and this would be the column totals. So what makes the difference between these row and column totals and these interior numbers is that the inside numbers are called contingency counts, because each one of those four numbers describes two things going on. Like, for example, here, the 6. The 6 tells you that there are 6 stocks that have shown a loss of value recently, as well as a loss of value annually, both. 14 stocks have shown appreciation recently and annually, whereas the other 11 and 9, the other 20 stocks, have shown losses in one direction, like recently, but gains in the other direction, in the opposite way, in the annual change. So 11 stocks have lost money recently and gained money over the last year. 9 have gained money recently, but lost money in the long term over the year. Now on to use STATCRUNCH in order to derive all possible row percentages, column percentages, and total percentages. Procedurally, the arithmetics of a row percentage involve taking any one of these 4 contingency counts and dividing them by their proper row total, be it 23, 17, or 40. So, for example, a row percentage of the items in the first row would take the 14 and the 9 and divide the 14 and the 9 by the 23. Then we would take the 11 and the 6 and divide those by the 17, and so on and so forth. So that's how row percentages are computed. Column percentages are computed by taking the contingency counts and dividing them by the column totals. And overall totals are calculated by taking any number and dividing any number by the grand total of 40. And those are called overall percentages. So those are the 3 varieties of percentages that can be calculated from a contingency count. In order for STATCRUNCH to do all this, the first thing you have to do is make sure that the row totals are deleted. So delete the whole column. Notice how I can just move the mouse cursor to the gray cell that says row total. And the moment I do that, this down pointing arrow tip appears. If I'm not in that cell, if I'm anywhere else in the STATCRUNCH page, I do not see that pull down menu. But the moment that I put the cursor, the mouse, point into the gray zone without clicking the mouse, just put the mouse, point the mouse to that cell, a downward arrow appears, and in that menu, delete column is one of the items possible. So I'm going to delete that column, and then I'm going to go to row 3, and as soon as I enter row 3, the pull down menu allows me to delete that row. And so I end up having only the contingency counts in the input of the summary data form for STATCRUNCH. And now come the command sequence. So when I try to do the command sequence, I got to do the following. I have to type stat, without clicking the mouse, move down to tables, continue without clicking the mouse to contingency, and finally follow the mouse movement to summary. So it's a 4 movement mouse. Stat, tables, contingency with summary. Once I get to with summary, that's when I left click on that particular action, or if I'm using one of those pads in a iMac, or I just slide the finger around and I don't click on the pad until I hit the summary, stat tables contingency with summary. The columns that I'm going to select are going to be the columns that have counts, that have contingency counts. So that would be the columns that are called 52-week plus and minus. Upon highlighting those two, you should see them appear on the right-hand side in the white area as the 52-week positive and 52-week negative changes. So that's how you select the columns that have counts. In order to then select a manner in which the software will interpret the data by row, you need to highlight the row labels. And the row label has to be the recent column, because the recent column is where you find the row labels. The third part of this calculation is the display. What are you going to be displaying about this particular contingency table, aside from subtotals by row and column, the so-called marginal distributions of the data? Well, as we said earlier, we want to calculate the row, the column, and the percent of total. So I'm going to highlight those three items, and by clicking compute, I'm going to get a table, and this table is going to have every single possible answer to any question about a relative frequency with respect to these particular stocks, these particular 40 stocks. Okay, so now how do I use this table to answer the questions in problem 8, in LAB2 question 8? That is the next item, the next consideration. So in order to do this, I'm going to share with you the assignment. Okay. And I'm going to read a question. The question I'm going to read is question A. Question A is in the form of a percentage, and it's in the form of a structure of a question. So I'm going to dissect that question in our whiteboard. And the question is, what percent of the companies reported a positive change in their stock price over the prior 52 weeks? The most important aspect to a question about a percentage is as follows. It's actually to find the verb. The verb is going to be here highlighted in green, and the verb is essentially separating the two parts of the question. So any question that you have about a percentage will have the following structure. What percentage of something, then will come the verb of the question, and then there will come another part of the question followed by the question mark. So the verb is critical because the verb separates these two aspects to the question and are key to being able to help you answer any question. A percentage is essentially going to be a ratio of one number divided by another. And these numbers are going to be numeric counts. The count on the top is going to be called the count of the object of the question. So it's going to be a number. And the number, and then what goes on the bottom of the fraction will also be another count, the count of the benchmark or the point of reference. So a benchmark is a point of reference and an object is what we're actually trying to count. So a percentage will always have this structure. So in order to answer a question about a percentage, we need to read the question as it is stated and identify the object and identify the benchmark. The object is always going to be what is before. The object is going to be what is after the verb. So I'm highlighting it here in yellow. So the object is what comes after the verb. And then the benchmark is what occurs before the verb. So the benchmark goes before the verb. Benchmark goes before the verb, and the object goes after the verb. Okay, so I'm going to color the object in yellow and the benchmark in blue. And blue goes before, yellow goes after. So in this particular case, how do I find the answer to the question of what percent of the companies reported, in this context, a positive change over the last 52 weeks? The number on the bottom, because it is the companies and there's no qualifier to which companies we're talking about, will in my case be the 40, the total number of companies, all companies. Whereas the number in the top will be all companies that had a 52-week change, and that will correspond to a column total. In this particular instance, the column that I'm referring to is the column with positive annual stock changes, and that's a total of 25 stocks. So that's the column total. So in order to get the right answer, I'm going to divide 25 by 40. Now, I don't have to divide 25 by 40 in this case because I already know what that is from the table answers that are found in my stat lab. So all I have to do is find what 25 is divided by 40, and that happens to be 62.5%. So I get the answer already as a percent, 62.5. So I'm going to go back to my homework and then click inside the blue box and type 62.5, and the answer will be correct. In the next question, it says, what percent of the companies, again, reported is the verb, a positive change over both time periods? So now the object is different than before. Before, the object was the positive change annually, the whole column, the whole 25 stocks in the first left column. Now, we're only looking at stocks that have a positive change both ways, and that's only the 14 at the beginning of this number here. So 14 divided by 40 is going to be what I get from looking at my answers, which is 35%. So I'm going to go to my homework and put in 35% into this box and check my answer, and as you'll see, it's the correct answer. As the problems in the different parts of this question advance, they get a little bit more complex, be it because the object is more complex or the benchmark is more complex. But it's important to always isolate the verb so that you can see what comes before the verb, in this case the companies, so that I know that in this context I'm looking for a percent of total. A negative change over both time periods implies that I'm looking for these 6 stocks that have a negative pattern, and 6 out of 40 is 15%. So I'm just going to go here and put in 15%. Check my answer, it should be right. Next question. What percent of the companies reported reported is the verb, the benchmark is all the companies, so it's out of 40 stocks, so it's going to be a percent of total. And I'm looking for a positive change one way with a negative the other. So that's my object. It's a very complex object because it counts any stock that suffers a positive change one way combined with a negative change the other way. And so in this case, in part D, I'm going to need to look at these 11 stocks, which have a 27.5% of all the stocks in them, and these 9, which are also negative annual but positive by recent day. So this is another 22.5%. So when I combine the 27.5 with the 22.5%, to combine all of these 11 and 9 stocks that have positive changes one way with negative changes the other, I get a total of 20 out of 40, or 50% of the companies are in this particular percentage. Following to part E, it says, among those companies reporting a positive change over a recent day, among those companies reporting a positive change over a recent day, comma, what percentage also reported? There's the verb. So now that you see the verb, you notice that there's a lot of information prior to the verb. So the benchmark is very complicated. And then the object is very simple. So in this case, it's the reverse of what happened in problems in parts C and B of this question. That the verb tells us that the kind of companies we're looking at is only a subset of all 40, and I'm only interested in the ones that had a positive change in the prior year, because that's what comes after the verb. So in order to find this answer, I'm going to first focus on the stocks that had a positive change in the prior year, in the recent day. So that's 23 of these stocks. And out of the 23, 14 had a positive change annually. 14 out of the 23 is 60.87%. So that's going to be the percentage that will help us answer this particular question. Notice how the format is as necessary. Rounded to 1 decimal place as needed means actually it's not done exactly right. I need to change that 0.87 to a 60.9% so that it's rounded to 1 decimal place. And upon checking the answer, I'm going to get the answer right. The next question and last part says that if you look at the companies that have had a negative change over a recent day, what percentage also reported a positive change in the prior year? So among these negative change stocks, among these 17 stocks, which ones had a positive change in the prior year? The answer is these 11 out of these 17, for a percentage of 64.71%. Or since they want it in 1 decimal format, 64.7. So I'm going to take that 64.7 and I'm going to put it in as the answer to the question. And I'm going to notice that these last 2 percentages, which were row percentages of positive changes over the prior year, they're very similar in percentage. This is about 61% to 65%. So there does not seem to be any relationship between the performances by recent day and by year, due to the fact that the percentages of companies that stocks that behave in these ways are pretty comparable, 61 to 65%. This is an example of what the textbook refers to as independent items. So I'm going to check the answer, and the question is complete, and it's complete in good order. We have 3 out of 3 points as a score. And so this is how you would respond to the different parts of question 8 in lab number 2. Thank you for watching.